My name is Patricia Kathleen, and this podcast series will contain interviews I conduct with women, female identified, and non binary individuals regarding their professional stories and personal narrative as it relates to their perspective. This podcast is designed to hold a space for all individuals to learn from their counterparts, regardless of age, status, or industry. We intend to transparently investigate the evolving global dialogue regarding underrepresented figures in all industries across the USA and abroad. By hosting these stories and conversations, we aim to contribute to the changing platform and representation of these individuals for the future. Now let's start the conversation. Hi everyone, and welcome back. I am your host, Patricia, and today we are talking to Aisha Addo. Aisha is the founder and CEO of driveher Transportation, Inc. You can find it online at www.driveher.ca. Welcome, Aisha.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
I'm
really
excited too. Yeah, I love your company. We were talking off the record before we got on today, and I feel really passionate about its core ethos and its drive, and so I'm excited to unpack it. It's always fun to talk to founders and new founders and stuff like that, but it's also I'm really excited when you really love what the product is. So for everyone listening, I'm going to read a bio on Aisha, but before I do that, a quick roadmap for today's podcast. We will first look at Aisha's brief academic background and early professional history to kind of garner a sense of the platform that she's coming from. And then we'll turn our efforts towards unpacking all of the like nuts and bolts, the who, what, when, where, why, how, and then turn to the ethos as well as unpacking driveher Transportation, Inc., as well as Power to Girls Foundation. Then we'll look at goals that Aisha has for the next 3 years regarding all of her endeavors. Those have changed remarkably for people over the past 3 months. And then we'll wrap, yeah, right. And then we'll wrap everything up with advice that Aisha has for those of you looking to get involved in what she's doing or perhaps emulate some of her career success. So a quick bio on Aisha before I start peppering her with questions. Aisha Addo thrives on working to make the world a better place for women. Although she's a graduate in business administration and accounting, her true passion and dedication lie in ensuring girls around the world are provided with the guidance and resources that help them identify their true purpose and calling to reach their full potential. Aisha founded Power to Girls Foundation, a nonprofit organization to offer young girls the mentors and role models that were absent during her own youth. As a facilitator and director of Power to Girls, Aisha uses her personal experiences and knowledge to create safe and engaging spaces for the girls she works with. Aisha is the recipient of the Young, Black, and Gifted Award for Community Service and was also named a Black Diversity Group role model and one of the 100 Black women to watch in Canada and among the 150 Black women making history in Toronto. The ride-sharing service driveher is Aisha's latest initiative created for women by women and the next step in her journey to continue to empower and protect women. So Aisha, we have a very shared ethos and lineage between the work that we do at Patricia Kathleen Podcast, and I cannot wait to kind of crawl through some of that. But before we get there, would you mind painting a picture for us about your early academic background and professional life that kind of brought you to these endeavors?
Absolutely. So once again, thank you so very much for having me on here. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. So a little bit of a background. I came to Canada when I was 14, from Ghana, so West Africa specifically. And when I came to Ghana, like through, no fault of my own or no fault of anyone's, I found myself in actually the foster care system. And throughout that system, one of the things that like really stood out to me, aside from like, just the way that the system is set up for, people of color or like even girls in general, was one thing that my foster mom said to me. So she sat me down. She's like, Aisha, there's a couple of expectations that are, basically expected of you as someone that is considered to be in the system. So one is you're supposed to be kind of like, a high school dropout. You're supposed to be a teenage mom. You're supposed to be like, a drug addict at some point in your life. And like, when she was having that conversation with me, there was just something in me that's just like, I'm not gonna be that stereotype, like, you know, but that wasn't something that I said out loud to her. I kind of like said that to myself. So that had always been at the back of my mind. So when at 17, I moved out of the foster care system and I was on my own, it was really kind of like the period where, you know, you're figuring yourself out and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, this is all the things that I've been told I'm supposed to be. So now who am I going to be aside from that, right? Because it's so easy for you to like, in a way, like gravitate towards certain things just because you've heard it said about yourself or you've heard it said about your life. So when I finished high school, I enrolled in college, and my course of choice is actually accounting. So I'm an accounting graduate.
Mm-hmm.
I do not practice accounting as a career, obviously.
What was the drive to accounting? Did it have a specific allure to you?
So I really loved math when I was in Ghana, and I enjoyed math even like when I was in Toronto, like I was going through high school. So I remember having a conversation with my dad, like when I finished high school, I'm like, I don't know, like, you know, we have to choose our courses, we have to, you know, go through all these things. I'm like, I don't know what to do. You know, and it's like, well, you've always liked math, and I had taken an accounting course during high school, and I really excelled at it, and I was good at it. I'm like, you know what, I'm going to take accounting. So he's like, what about accounting? I'm like, yeah, you know what, you're right. So that was kind of like what propelled me to taking accounting. However, one thing that like I actually barely share is the fact that when I was figuring out what course to take in school, a couple of my friends had said to me, you know, you should do like, you know, child and youth work or social work or whatever, because we can see you doing that stuff. And my excuse at that point was that like, listen, I've gone to high school with like, you know, all these people. I don't want to have to go to college with all these people again. Like, I don't want to see these faces again. Because again, like my idea of, you know, college is that, you know, you're going to be, majority of the people that I knew at that time were going into that sector and into that field. And it also felt like like a sector that was like streamlined specifically for people of color. So I was just like, nah, I'm not going to be like, I don't want to be that quote unquote stereotype. Later on, I realized that like, you know, I really should have studied social work.
You're like, they were right.
You're right. I really should have studied social work, mainly because of like all the different things that I found myself doing. Like I found myself really engaging in community. That's kind of like also what led to the start of Power to Girl. So it would have made sense. But then I think because my background was not necessarily in social work, and like most of the work that I was doing was catered around that, it really like I was able to bring like a personalized aspect to it. So like even currently with Power to Girls, we get the chance of like bringing in university students as placements or co-op students. And the teachers always say to me, you know, you're like, they get a chance to experience social work in its raw form because of like the work that you guys are doing. Because for us, we only provide the theory. We really tell them, okay, this is what it's supposed to be in the book. But with our support and like with our partnership, they're able to like really get that hands-on experience. So I think I'm able to live vicariously throughout my girls, although I didn't study social work. So like my background is actually in accounting. I finished school and then I went straight into like just running Power to Girls full time until like, you know, everything with driveher kind of like came about. So that's like my educational background.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I would kind of want to just continue on that road then. You
Mm.
mentioned Power to Girls, and we talked about it being a nonprofit organization to offer young girls mentors and role models. And the only reference I have to those kinds of nonprofits that I think kind of blossomed more after my youth, so I didn't see a lot of them, was like Big Brothers Big Sisters, the YMCA, YWCA had similar programs. So is your program similar to that, and how does it vary? Can you kind of talk about the structure of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started Power to Girls, honestly, it was really remembering some of the things that my foster mom had said to me. And it was really like coming to Canada, it was something that I faced as well, where I didn't know where to go to for support. I didn't know who to talk to for support. There was a lot of like, you know, personal challenges in terms of like, you know, you're in a new country, there's a culture shock. There is like, I speak English, and in Ghana, we speak English. So there isn't so much of like a language barrier. But being like, you know, from Africa at that time was not something that people were kind of like welcoming of, so there was a lot of like bullying and stuff like that was going on. But then one of the things for me was that like the focus for the organization is really targeting marginalized girls. So it's about girls that like, on the regular would not have access to certain programs, girls that like, their parents are like immigrants, or they themselves are immigrants, and they've come to Canada new, or like, they're finding challenges in like coping and adapting. So like for us, the main thing from the get-go was like focusing on marginalized girls and marginalized communities, because I knew firsthand what it was like to be in Canada new and not have access to any of these resources. Because some of the resources that like, you mentioned, yes, they were available, but at that time they were not very open to people of color. Like people of color didn't feel like they can actually like, access these programs and these resources freely. So that was kind of like how Power to Girls came to play. And honestly, we started with like 6 girls from my church. And then we started having conversations. It was like, hey, tell me what are some of the challenges that you're facing. And then the challenges like, varied from like school to home to like everything else in between. So one of the things that I realized that really like provided us with a leverage was that I'm from Ghana, so I kind of like understood where their parents were coming from like the immigrants' perspective. So like any challenge that parents they were having with their parents, I was kind of like able to be that middle person and say, okay, this is the reason why they say this. This is the reason why they say this, because there is this cultural background here, because there is this cultural understanding of this here. So I became a bridge, and I was also able to form like relationships with the parents as well. So it was really like, I think that was one of like our main differentiators. Like we were very relationship based, and we're very like personal with, the girls that we get the opportunity to work with. Yeah.
So, I mean, and I'm wondering, how do you select getting into that mentor relationship? There's a lot to unpack here with the, you have pedagogical lenses that you imply, or you're imparting with the structure. But before we get into that, I'm wondering, how do you select your mentors for these people, and how much training or education or guidance do you give them before you attach them or link them up with one of these girls?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So from the get-go, that was one of like the main challenges, is around like ensuring that you're finding mentors that are able to connect with the girls like one-on-one, right? Because you're thinking about time, you're thinking about obligations and like all these different things. So we kind of like switched up the module a bit and created kind of like a group mentorship. So throughout our programs, like currently we've been able to partner with the Toronto Catholic School Board. So we actually run our programs in the school. But then when we started out, it was really more around bringing the mentors to them. So every week when we have program, we will bring different women with like, so 2 things that we were always looking for is around career aspirations and life experiences. So those were the 2 things that we were focusing on, is that like we would bring in women that had, life experiences to share that were in correlation with some of the challenges that the girls had brought up. And then also women that were in particular sectors and in particular fields that are connected to kind of like where the girls want to go in future, or like the things that they want to do with themselves. So those are the 2 things that we were focused on. So we'll bring them in every week as, like guest speakers, as, like facilitators and all of that stuff, so that way the girls have access to them after, and not just, so they can reach out to them and say, hey, I have a question about this. And we normally pick people that we know for a fact that like are open to that open relationship with the girls and are open to answering questions after, because the one-on-one mentorship module was really difficult, mainly because our girls had like, a lot of like different obligations. So literally the times that we have them for, if it's like 2 hours, that's literally the time that we have them for that week. So it was really hard in terms of like trying to like create one-on-one connections that wouldn't necessarily work with like any other obligations that they had at home or at school and all that stuff. So another option too that we added was that we started providing resources to the parents, to like, so mothers specifically, so that way the mothers can continue that empowerment process at home, so it doesn't become solely dependent on like external forces, but then it was something that was really happening within the home. So yeah, that was kind of like the module that we chose. And then now we are introducing more kind of like online mentorship, and like recruit, like we've been recruiting for mentors over the past month, And then what we do is that like the girls are able to go on our platform, and then they're able to connect and link with like, these women. So they have access to like, a whole lot of different women from like different walks of life, and then they can ask them questions and have conversations with them as well. So that's been kind of like the process and like the phases that the mentorship in itself has gone through. It's more around like making sure that they know this person exists and they have access to them.
Yeah, I mean, to that end, when you take it online, and as has been necessary lately with the pandemic, can you not open it up to be entire countrywide for Canada, if not globally? Like at some
Absolutely.
point, it sounds like you could get these mentors and mentees, unified. And also, I want to clarify: do you take questionnaires from the mentors as to their specialties, and then it sounds like the mentees, you ask them what areas they're interested in, so you get that
Absolutely.
like nice harmony going?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
awesome. That's so fascinating. I don't really recall that being the process of things before. It sounds like it would make for a really powerful relationship,
Yes, and
that
that's
you
what we're
want.
going for, right? Is like ensuring this, because there've been like different um research around like, young people having like a consistent caregiver in their life outside of their parents actually boost up their self-esteem, and it boosts up their confidence. So for us, we're really like, one of the things is that like we wanted to make sure that outside of their family, outside of, their school and like, the teachers and all that stuff, they still know that there's like one person that is consistent in their lives and one person that they can always go to, right? So like right now we're not in schools right now, of course. And like we've had our girls like, reach out to us. We've also created a helpline. So we say to them, if there's anything that you're experiencing, even throughout this period, that you want to talk to someone, like we're here, like hit us up. We would have a conversation with you. If you just want to vent and be like, listen, miss, I'm tired, my brothers are driving me insane, or my sister is doing this, like we're here to listen, because I think the mental well-being of like young people is so vital and it's so
Yeah.
important. And you have no idea the number of times that we hear like, oh my God, I'm so stressed. And to adults, they always feel like, what are you stressed about? Like, you're young, you're a kid. Like, what exactly do you have to be stressed about? But there's so many different like, stresses that are placed on them, that in more ways than one ends up like, showing up in, their self-esteem, showing up in the way that they show up to places and the way that they interact. So for us, if we're able to like curb that aspect, it'll be like, that's basically all we want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think people should want to help you do it. What, do you have a website for the foundation?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's powertogirls.com.
And
Yeah.
when people
And
get on there, they can find out more and kind of discover more about donation and all of that.
absolutely.
It sounds fantastic. I want you to grow. I want it to be international. I want it to be global. I'm
Appreciate
sure you needed that to be tasked with, right? I
it.
want to kind of turn our efforts, before I ask you about goals with the foundation. I want to turn our efforts now towards Drive Her Transportation.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you can unpack it. But before you do that, just for all of those little nerdy founders out there that want to know the nuts and bolts of it, people in the trenches are always like, did she have a co-founder? What's going on? So when was it launched? Did you take funding? And do you have founders outside of yourself?
Okay, great. That's a good question. So I would so for starters, I'm a solo founder. I am looking, like we are actually looking for a technical co-founder. Did I take funding? I did take kind of like a friends and family round. We've not gotten the opportunity to get like external funding or like capital funding just yet. Um, and then the last question was,
No, I think that was all three. Just
okay,
when,
perfect.
well, when, sorry, the year you
When?
found.
Yes. So we've been working on this from 2017, 2018. And then we did a beta in 2018. And then we actually ended up having to put it on hold for some time to rejig our stuff. And then 2020, this year, was when we were expected to launch. And then COVID kind of hit, and they were like, okay, great. This is great. This is amazing.
Yeah.
But but like, looking at just the way that things are going, we are still en route to do a launch in 2020,
Yeah.
once cities and everything else kind of like opens back up. But like a little bit of like a background on like what started Driver. So Driver actually started throughout my, like it started as a result of my personal experience. So I was in a taxi and, going from my friend's house to my house, And I got into a taxi, and this taxi driver, like, at first was really nice, but then started asking some really personal questions, like super uncomfortable questions. And this was like late at night. So there was no way that I would be like, okay, you know what, drop me off on the highway and I'll, kind of find my way back home. And so there was like the conversation started going south real quick. So I ended up actually having to call a friend, and I'm like, hey, listen, I need you to stay on the phone with me. Like, we don't have to talk about anything. Like, just stay on the phone until I get home, because this is becoming very uncomfortable. So after that experience, I kind of like, I chucked it as like, oh, it's one of those things, right? And I think a lot of people that I had spoken to also shared like, oh yeah, you know what? It is one of those things. And then kind of like moved on. But throughout the process of like actually working with Power to Girls and, building that relationship with my girls. So like now I have over like 20 girls that I personally mentor that like had been in the program from like the very, very beginning. So one of the things that I ended up becoming was I actually became a designated driver for them, where if they are staying on campus late, if they are, going out, like their parents trusted me to, like if they said, oh, I'm going with Aisha, like Aisha's dropping me off and Aisha's picking me back up, their parents were actually very comfortable with that. So I became that designated driver. And it was also because I knew, like I was okay doing that because I knew exactly the experience that I had had with, a taxi driver late at night when I was in driving. So it kind of like, there was one time, and I managed a Power to Girls Facebook page, and then I came across an article, and it was talking about this was in India, and this was like literally right after the experience where the young lady had gotten gang raped in the bus, and then they were sharing a company that had started that was focused on specifically female drivers. And so I was like, this is very interesting. So I actually shared it on our Power to Girls Facebook page, because we normally share like, inspiring stories. And I'm like, this is really inspiring, women taking their safety and stuff into their own hands. So like, let's say a week or two after, I was literally still thinking about that. And I'm like, now that I think about it, I don't think there's something like that in Canada. And currently, like, India is the only place that has that, like, that kind of a service. And doing the research, I was like, yeah, it makes sense because there's a higher rate of violence against women. And, like, it's also, and like one of the things for me is that like this is also providing economic empowerment, which is like vital as well. So I'm like, this is very interesting. So I had a conversation with my friend. I'm like, hey, so I came across this article, and I'm thinking that this would be something that would be very interesting to bring to Canada. And then at the same time, it would also be like, it would be a very interesting way to penetrate, like, the market in itself. So flashback actually to years ago, I had told my dad that I had wanted to start a taxi company or a taxi business, but this was supposed to be in Ghana. So I had the conversation with my friend, and then I had gone back home and I was talking to my dad about it. He's like, yeah, I think this is a great idea. You should absolutely do it. But then what they don't tell you about the tech space is that it is a very male-dominated space. And then access to funding is not so open, so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So while I was back home, I started working on like the business plan. I started working on like what it's going to look like, how it's going to feel, what the focus is going to be on. And for me, like, because I'm a social entrepreneur, everything else that I do has to like have social, it has to have some level of like a social impact. So for me, it wasn't just about, oh, you're creating a business, and you're focusing on women specifically, but it's like,
oh, Aisha, we lost audio on you. Sorry, did something on your end go? I didn't touch anything. There you are. You're back. That was weird. Oh, wait. And now I've lost audio again. That's weird. That hasn't happened before. Let me check let me check real quick and see are you still talking? Can you hear me?
I'm not talking.
There
I can
we
hear
go.
you.
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Let me check real quick with my tech person, and I can tell you the last word I heard you say.
Okay, perfect.
That was really weird. I've never had it just go silent before and still have perfect video. It's usually the other one.
Right?
So
technology for you.
I know. I will be editing this out against my editing. I just got done giving you my diatribe about like, I never edit anything. Like, this is getting edited out. This is too transparent. No, I mean, I actually would love to see this on podcast. If I was watching you and I, this is the part that I'd be like, ooh, are they going to resolve the issue?
You're like, do they know that there is no sound?
Okay. I just sent a little tantrum off to my tech. Hopefully that will get fixed on the back end.
Amazing.
So yeah, so you were just saying you went home, it's male dominated. Okay. And then, you were looking at coming back into Canada. After that, you spoke with your father. No, there was something after that. What did you say after that?
So I went back home. That was when I started working on my business plan. And then I was
Yes.
talking about how, for me, one of the things that's really important is that like I'm a social entrepreneur. So everything that I do has to have some level of like impact. It has to serve a purpose. So it was really like, I wanted to make sure that, yes, this was something that I had experienced, but then who else had experienced that? So I started speaking to women and I started like asking questions. I'm like, hey, this is the idea. This is what we want to create. Like, how do you feel about it? Like, what are your personal experiences? And that was when I started hearing experiences of women that, some, had gone through like, harassment, some had gone through actually like, sexual assault, and like all these different experiences. And there was one that really stood out to me. And it stood out to me because this was a lady that was like that at that time was in her late 30s. And she's like, yeah, like, I had this experience where like, the driver started harassing me. And like my next question to her was like, was it reported? And then she's like, no, it's like one of those things. And this was an incident that happened like 16 years ago. So that stood out to me because it had become so norm for women to experience this level of like harassment and violence. And that even to the extent where it's like we had become desensitized to it, where it's just like, oh yeah, you know what, it's one of those things. And I know because when it happened to me, I said, oh, you know what, it is one of those things. So that was really kind of like the fire that was lit, that I'm like, okay, I want to be able to do something about this. And in all honesty, building Drive Her has been one of like the hardest things that I've done in my life so far, because of just the different challenges and perceptions that it came with. You know, like I had mentioned earlier, now that I'm like, okay, we're gonna do this. Now I was like, how are you gonna do this? What are you gonna do? Like, now you ask like, the what, why, who, how, all those different questions.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, there's already a platform that has been set up. There's already something that, the communities and like people have become familiar with. So maybe what we can do is we can tap into that market already, because there's already a market there, right? So we can tap into that module and tap into that market. So we decided to go with like the gig module, where it's like, the folks own their vehicles and then they go through the process and then they get a percentage of, the fares and all that stuff. So we went through all of that. And then
let's set it up so everyone knows as you're kind of getting into like these like, and I love the pain that not for you, but this is where founders and entrepreneurs get their camaraderie. They're like, oh yes, that part was awful. I remember it. But let's set up what Drive Her is. It's an app.
Yes.
And what is it specifically for and do, and what are like the constituents around it?
Absolutely. So driveher is a rideshare app that connects female passengers to female drivers. But we're also focused around like, lifestyle, safety, and transportation. So how do we merge those three things together as a company? So that is what we do. And then we've been able to build a platform and build a product that is able to connect these three things together. So for us, like, in the beginning, it was a matter of like, how are we actually going to deliver this service that we've like, that we want to provide? Are we going to build our own platform? Are we going to leverage an existing platform? Are we going to, like just kind of like license it out? Like, how are we going to do all of those different things? So we decided, okay, we're going to start with like a white label. So we're going to rent a platform, like an already existing platform to use for our service. The challenge now is that we were trying to get insurance and trying to get our license to operate in Toronto. And that was just like, listen, we have to be careful about where data is stored, all of those different things. We were like, okay, cool. scratch that, we're going to build our own platform. But then again, I don't have a technical background. I am, I'm kind of like the visionary of the founders. So now it was a matter of like, how do we find the right people to build this platform? Who do we talk to build this platform? So we're able to outsource and get like, a tech team on board that like we still work with up to now, because we've been able to build that level of like relationship. But then prior to that, one of the things I was also really looking at was that I actually wanted to have a female developer develop driveher, because it would have just been amazing. However, finding a female developer at that time was very, very, very hard. And then it just, went into to go deeper, like to prove that like the tech space at that time was, I mean, it still is, but I feel like now people are a bit more vocal around like getting women engaged. But the tech scene at that time was super, super, super male dominated. And then especially adding on top of that, like, you're running a tech startup, there's also more questions that you're asked as a woman that I find that like, men are not necessarily asked that same questions. So it was very interesting. So while we're building, one of the things that, constantly came up, and I actually ended up having to like sit down with my developers and I'm like, hey, listen, I know that like, you might feel like, oh, this is sexist, or this is like, oh, like, this is discriminatory and all that stuff. But then I'm like, I want you to build this thinking about your mother. I want you to build this thinking about your sister. I want you to build this thinking about your girlfriend, and think about all those different moments where they would be in a taxi, or they would be in like, some sort of like a car or transportation service, and they call you, and to you it's like just another conversation, but to them it's like, this is the way that I can let that person know that, oh, I have a boyfriend, so don't talk to me in certain ways, or don't, harass me, or don't say certain things to me, right, that you might not be unaware of. And having that conversation with them was actually, it shifted the way that the working relationship became, because there was a bit more understanding as to the value of the product and the value of the service, than just, oh, this is just another project that we're working on because we've been contracted to do so. So I think that was like one of like the really monumental times for us as we were building out our project. So we created, we built our first phase, and then we did a beta. And, we opened it up to the world, and we're like, okay, great, we want you to test this out, give us your feedback. And like, it was amazing. We had over 3,000 downloads. Like literally within a week, we had like 3,000 downloads. And then it was just kind of like, and I share this and I laugh because I've had time to process all the stuff that happened throughout that period. So about a week after we did like our beta launch, and like, trying to get people to interact with the platform, at that time we had about 60 drivers on our platform. So trying to get people to like just experience it, like, give us feedback, because that was one of the key things that we wanted. Our system crashed because there was just an overload, and we're like, okay, what's going on? So we ended up having to take a weekend off to fix that and figure that out. And then like, okay, so we're back, we fixed that. Because again, this was a beta, so the worst was bound to happen. But one of the things that we never anticipated was that someone was actually going to try and hack our system. So 2 weeks after, a gentleman sent me an email, and he's like, oh, I've been able to hack your system, whatever. And like, in all honesty, I took it as like a joke. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I sent the email to my developers. I'm like, hey, this is what this person is saying. What's going on? And we also had like a security team that we had consulted at, like we were consulting with at that time. So I sent it to them as well. I'm like, hey, what's going on? This is what this person is saying. A day later, the person had sent whatever it is that they had done to the Toronto Star. So Toronto Star, for those that don't know, is like one of like the biggest newspaper and like online media outlets here in Toronto. So the person had sent it to Toronto Star, and I'm just like, oh my God, are you serious? Like this, and it was just like, it was one of those things where you're just sitting, you're just like, seriously, like we came this far. And then it was just, so at that point in time, like we had already, once we found out that like, okay, this was actually something that there was a vulnerability in like one of our servers, we contacted all of our customers and our drivers, and we let them know and all that stuff. So like they were aware. However, it's still not gonna like, take away from like the damage that was created in terms of like, like the perception of the people, right? Because it kind of like became like, oh yeah, of course, you know, it's a woman run business, what do you expect, kind of thing. And like those are some of the conversations that we were hearing, and some of the things that we were hearing, because it was like, oh, you know, yeah, like, you know, you want to compete with these people. And then it's like, what we want to do is creating value. What we want to do is like ensuring safety for our users, our drivers, and all that stuff. So like this actually goes against our core and like the things that we represent and the things that we stand for. So as a result of that, we're not gonna like, you know, we're not gonna put our customers and all that stuff in like, you know, in that position. So it was a very interesting time. So as a result of that, we kind of like wrapped up our beta early, and we're like, okay, great. We've taken all these learnings, all these feedback already. So now what we're going to do is that we're going to work on that, and then we're going to basically take the feedback that we've gotten, and then we're going to like, you know, put it together and re-deliver like another product that is, you know, more secure and like all those different things. So yeah, like after that, it was just more like, okay, now we're engaging our audience through social media and stuff like that. But then we're also like building, we're rebuilding, we're, you know, restructuring, we're strategizing, making sure that we're in a position to like, when we do a relaunch, we're in a better position to serve our people. So that's basically what we've been doing for the past year and a half. And then like we've finally wrapped everything up beginning of this year. And then we're like, okay, great. This summer is going to be amazing because we are going to, you know, now people are going to get a chance to really experience it in its fullness. And it's been so amazing. And like, I'm actually, and you know, you're never supposed to say this as a founder, in a sense of like, I'm really happy with the product that we've built, because maybe, you know, a month later, I'm going to be like, okay, no, this is not it. But it's like, I'm happy with the product that we built because we built it with like our customers in mind, and we really took into account all the feedback that they provided us, right? So
Yeah.
it's been very like, it's been amazing building this. But like I said earlier, it's been also one of the hardest hardest things to
You've
build.
had some significant growing pains. There's no joke. To be hacked and then be tattled onto the greatest rag in your town is like no joke. What I will say to that hacker out there, I'm married to an original Silicon Valley computer nerd, and so I love speaking directly to them, is
Mm.
that Equifax was hacked, like the largest, most secured databases in the world were hacked. So you hacking the beta of driveher just means that you're a mean person. It doesn't make you special, and it doesn't make your company weak. Thank you
Yep.
for finding the weakness. Let's plug up that hole and move on. Like the
Yep.
idea that it's like, what? It was hacked. No, it's because she's a woman. It's like, no, it's because it's computers. Like that's what they do, and they will continue to do. And we have to put trust in them, like we do our
Yep.
currency and all sorts of things that begin to fail us. When those systems fail, you
Absolutely.
know, there's nothing else you can trust in this world outside of like your loved ones and your mother. Like, I don't know why people are like, how could it have been hacked? Like, well, it is a system. But I imagine that wake up call for you, I've never heard anything so like bleak as to
Yeah.
like they hacked us and then they tattled to the local paper. That is like daunting. I think I would cry and maybe close up shop, or at least think about it. I mean, that's
Honestly, that was
amazing.
exactly like, that was the process for me. Like I remember exactly like, you know, the night that it all kind of like happened. Like I was married, I was like crying. My friends were calling me. I'm like, listen, I don't want to talk to anyone right now,
Yeah.
because it's like it was a labor of love, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like it still is a labor of love. And I think when you've gone through that experience, you kind of like you wake up and you're like, okay, great. Now we're in business, because that means that there's someone out there that is like
Yeah.
constantly watching and constantly tailing us, and like, you know, constantly trying to like, you know, do something to our servers. And it was also very interesting because I, for me, as the process was unfolding, I was speaking to like one of my mentors, and he's like, okay, don't deviate from it. Don't like not speak about it. Like, be honest, you know, be like, just say it as it is. I'm like, all right, cool. So I had the conversation, and for a very long time, it was one of kind of like the shame aspect of, you know, building a business, or of an entrepreneur for me, or like of
Mm.
being an entrepreneur. But then as time went on, like I became comfortable having that conversation, because it is part of our process and it's part of our growing pains, like you said. So like now I'm also able to look at it and be like, you know what? it was quite unfortunate, but I'm happy that it happened then and not later on down the line when, we had grown up we had built our brand, like, to
Yeah.
a higher standpoint, where it would have had a bit more, like much more, damage and much more repercussions. So it was kind of like one of those things that you go through the process and then you cry about it and then you're just like, okay, great, let's get to work.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a true testament. It's the ultimate like baptism into whether or not you were for real with the company,
Yeah.
and I think the ownership that you felt over that is really testament to your character and who you were. And yeah, I don't know any good it would do, but to remind people, like, if code ever becomes unbreakable or unhackable, it ceases to be code. It suddenly becomes like steel. There's just it's the whole theory behind it. You just need to
Mhm.
educate people about computers. We'd love to believe that something is infallible,
Mm.
unhackable. It's just not the case, and so
Absolutely.
that's the whole beauty of the premise. That's why it keeps changing the universe. It's why
Mhm.
we got gifted Instagram and Twitter 15 years ago. It's like it's got to keep moving and changing.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I mean, just thanking that little hacker. I don't know. Part of me is I'm so mischievous, and I came up in Silicon Valley during the aughts, and so
Absolutely.
I'm always like, "Ooh, I'll bet that was Uber." I'll bet it was some sabotage,
You
and I'm
know,
sure it
the
could just be some curious little 13-year-old girl. For all
Mhm.
I know,
Oh
it
no,
was
like
just
the
somebody.
funny thing is we actually know who the hacker is because
Oh,
so they after that happened, they when they sent it to the Toronto Star, they the Toronto Star credited their company for like kind of like the hack. And it was very interesting because this person shared it on their LinkedIn. So like prior to that, this person had like followed me on like Instagram. Like it was just like the person was like tailing me in a sense.
hmm.
So after that happened, and then it kind of like showed up on that person's LinkedIn, and then on their LinkedIn it talked about how like, oh, his company was responsible for like kind of like finding this like this vulnerability and the driver servers and all that stuff. And it's like, okay, well, it sounded like you wanted press coverage and you got it. So
Yeah, I mean, there's an atonement for that that's coming down the road as well. Like that in particular individual's gonna meet with a very interesting future.
absolutely.
Nobody makes empires of gold off of like rubbish. You've got to
Mm,
start with integrity. So, well, I'm curious. I mean, I love your story and I love your candor with it, and I love that I found you at the side of it where you're like, I've got perspective. And I'll bet, with the pandemic hitting, you're like, yeah, this has happened to us before. We've
yeah,
been blindsided. But
absolutely.
I don't think it's going to get you down. I don't think it's going to ruin Drive Her. And
No.
I know that things will start picking up again. And so it may be that it's a slow and softer launch. But
Mm.
have you shifted your plans, and do you have plans for the next 1 to 3 years that you're kind of projecting, or goals for Drive Her that you would like to see met?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, like you said, this has like it's been very interesting, like always using the opportunity to learn. And then like just looking at just the way that things are, we are forming a new normal. Yes, like things are gonna go back, but then it's not necessarily gonna go back at the pace that we expected it to. So for us now, like it's more around like positioning ourselves to be able to respond once cities are like reopened, once things are kind of like back in motion. And then one of the things too that like has been very interesting throughout the period of like building, and like I mentioned this earlier around me personally, like as a social entrepreneur, ensuring that like every aspect of every business or product or whatever it is that I create has that social impact and has that social value. We've also been looking at like what driver would look like in emerging markets specifically, because
Hmm.
there is an opportunity for us to not only providing the service but then also really providing real value trainings, opportunities to women that might not necessarily have access to some of these things, right? So we've been looking at like what that looks like, and I think that's something that would definitely come into fruition over the next year or two, because it's been a real focus. And like we've also seen like based off of like our research and like based off of like the conversations that we've had, we've also seen like real value coming through that as well. So yeah, like currently just really building. And like I said, like we had finished our process, we had finished our testing, we were just finalizing things with the city, and then like everything kind of happened. So once everything comes back, we will definitely have it available for, Toronto specifically, for folks to be able to for folks to be able to have access to the platform and experience it the way that we had intended for it to be experienced. And like even more, throughout the process, we've also been able to notice like several verticals and multiple verticals that we can actually like that driveher can be used for. So
Yeah.
we've been able to tap into like, parents that wants the service to be used for their
Yeah.
kids, and like seniors, and like parents that want the service to be used for their parents, so there's been like an amazing kind of like amazing verticals that have come up out of this. And like, we've also been able to like really come up with some really amazing stuff that I cannot share just yet, but I'm really excited because it like we've learned a lot. And
Yeah.
for us, it's not only just being like a transportation company, but it's around how do we meet the needs of women um holistically. So throughout like, their like, let's say their everyday life, where are the like, the instances that we can plug ourselves in as a transportation service? How can we plug ourselves in as like a lifestyle brand, and how can we plug ourselves in as like, an empowerment brand? So like those three things, and like, kind of like putting it together and being supportive. And then of course at the core of it all is like ensuring that our passengers or users, our communities are safe and they feel safe when interacting with our service.
Yeah, I'm wondering, do you have any metrics set up, or will you just be taking it as it comes as far as noticing? I mean, this has the potential, especially in other emerging markets and different status of world countries. But the model you're setting up here, and the populations that you're serving and you're going to employ, has the opportunity to genuinely shift the gender parity issue,
Absolutely.
in a lot of like, you can start off micro and small with cities and towns and things like that, but this is a key area. Having just returned from Fiji, I didn't see one female cab driver the entire time I was there, and I finally asked a few of them when I was there, and they said that they knew of one in the entire cab drivers association of the Fijian island, and Viti Levu, which is the capital that I was on, one. And so, and that's a lot of different paradigms set up in that. And I'm not judging that system, but you take that and you put a bunch of females in there, being asked to host females around. You shift that paradigm really quickly in a climate like that. And I'm wondering if you've looked at, after you launch and you get things going, having that dialogue with how much you're changing those numbers in your own community. How many
Yeah.
jobs you're shifting women to. I mean, driving someone around, cab driving, whatever you want to call that service, is a wonderful opportunity for our particular gender, or people who are
Absolutely.
identifying with our gender. It's a moonlighting job. It's a job
Mhm.
parents can do,
Yeah.
people returning to school. It's just,
Yeah.
it's an amazing opportunity. And so to shift that dynamic solely for that group of people,
Mhm.
have you thought about how you're going to kind of capture that, that economic growth or group or anything like that?
No, that's actually a really good question. So one of the things for us is around like, being able to provide those numbers, because when we started like, building Drive Her, like, a lot of folks felt that, oh, this is not an issue, this is not like this, women don't experience this, women don't care about these things. And for us, it's around like, how are we still able to provide our services while also providing that educational aspect and letting you know that, hey, no, actually, this is how, like, this is what's happening. Do you know that like 80% of like the transportation industry specifically is dominated by men? And then like if you look at like, the current platforms that are out there, it's only like about 17% of all like their drivers are like women, and this is like globally, right? So
Mm.
if you look at all of those different numbers, for us, we are at a very unique intersection, because we're niche, we're very targeted, and we're very focused. So we are definitely collecting collecting that data in terms of like saying, okay, well, we've been able to employ, let's say, 60 women throughout like, like the first 3 months, and these are the things that these women do. Early on, to like just through conversation and like really having those conversations with our drivers, we realized that our drivers themselves are also like entrepreneurs. So they're like, they're mothers, they're women that have like side hustles, they're women that, are website designers, they're like all these different things. So we're also looking at like how are we merging these people with like their potential customers as well, right? So how is it that, like, let's say if you get into a vehicle and you're having a conversation with a driver and then you find out, oh, I'm a photographer, by the way. And they're like, oh my God, I'm looking for a photographer as well. And then right then and then you've been able to make that connection. So for us, those are like the main metrics that we want to be collecting and the data that we want to be collecting around the impacts that we're making, but then also the numbers in terms of like the number of women that we're providing that economic empowerment to. And then also in the indirect ways that we're also going to be providing them with economic empowerment, right? So if, let's say, we connect them to a potential customer, that is us indirectly connecting them to, you know, economic empowerment and to access to funds. So yeah, those are some of the things that like we're looking at.
That's so exciting. I mean, when you said that, I thought it was like ultimate matchmaking. The idea that my ride could also be someone that I could collaborate with in the future is genius. And that's the kind of Yankee know-how, which you're not American, but when you, if you were, it's that kind of ingenuity that I'm like standing up about all the time. I love that. That's so exciting. Well, we're running out of time, but I want to wrap it up with, and this might be hard for you because you come from a platform of advice. And so I need to word this carefully. Normally I just ask people for advice, but that's what you've developed your entire career on, is like this accurate career advice education model. I'm wondering if someone walked up to you, I'll just say it as I always do with my guests. If a young woman or female identified or non-binary individual, anyone other than a white cisgendered male, walked up to you and said, listen, I'm getting into, I'm just starting off, you know, I think I want to get into the transportation situation. I know it's going to be a long road. I think I can do it. You know, my father thinks I can as well. I'm getting ready to cut my teeth on this. I don't have a backing in that, but that's never stopped me before. What are the top 3 pieces of advice you would offer that individual knowing what you know now?
That's a good question. So the first thing that I'll say is to like make sure that like you know your industry from the inside out, like literally, so that you're able to answer any question that comes up. Number 2, I would say is that like it sounds very cliche, but believe in yourself even when you don't feel like it and even when no one else does, because that is one of the main things that is going to like keep you going. And then the last thing that I'll say is that like always remember your why. Why does it have to be done this way? Does it have to be done this way? Are there alternative ways that you can do it? Are there other people that you can potentially partner with to make it easier? Like, I think those would be the 3 things. So understanding the industry. Number 2 is like, I'll say, actually, let me switch it around. Number 1 is believe in yourself, even when no one else does. And even when you don't feel like it. Number 2 is like, know the industry, understand the industry, understand your competitors, also talk to your customers. And like I'll put all of that in like, you know, the understanding your industry, because you have to talk to people, like talk to the people that you're hoping to serve so that they're able to give you direct feedback. If there are articles and stuff that are written about like, you know, that specific industry, go through the comment section and see all the things that people are talking about, the things that people are not happy about. And then the last thing, wait, what was the last thing that I said?
You said, I have it right here, always
Thank
remember
you.
your why.
Remember your why. Yeah, like always remember your why, because that is going to be the one thing that when all else fails is going to be a constant, and that's what's going to keep you going. The why, like why you're doing it. So if you don't know why you want to get into a sector, then don't do it.
Right. Keep it present with you always. Those
Yeah.
are both, all 3 crucial. So I'll read them back to you and make sure that you've got it and I've got it too. Believe in yourself even when you don't feel like it.
Yeah.
Know your industry inside and out, and always remember your why.
Yes.
I love those. Those are words to live by for sure. Well, Aisha, we're out of time, but I wanted to say thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you today. And I really hope I get to circle back around in a year and find out where Drive Her is doing and beg you to bring it down to the States.
Your laws are very different from Canada.
Are
But
they?
we've gotten a lot of requests, but we'll see. We'll see how that turns out.
Well, if there's enough requests, there should be a way. If there's
Definitely.
enough will, enough angry women in powerful pockets, make it happen.
Definitely. Definitely.
Thank you so much for all of your time and your candor. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so very much, Patricia. I hope you're staying safe and yeah, have a wonderful rest of the week.
Yeah, you as well. And for everyone listening, we've been speaking with Aisha Addo. She's the founder and CEO of Drive Her Transportation Inc. You can find out more about it as well as her foundation at www.driveher.ca.
Yes.
And until we speak again next time, thank you for giving us your time
Yeah.
today. And as Aisha said, stay in, stay safe. And from me, remember to always bet on yourself.
Mm.
Slancha.